Welcome to the baggage guys drinking, coffee. Yeah, coffee, that's right. Ryan and Mike unpacking all things baggage handling. Let's get right to it.
Hey everybody, welcome to IABSC's Baggage Guys Drinking Coffee. We're your hosts. I'm Mike Kessler, that's Ryan Evers. And today's episode is being sponsored by Introba. We'll be drinking the Introba coffee. Introba for all your BHS design needs. But first today we're going to welcome to the bag room Dan Vandevenne from Brock Solutions. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, Dan.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. So, we've known each other, what now?
It's been a long time. 15 years.
It's about 15?
Yeah.
Same for me.
Sorry to hear that.
It's all good.
So tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah. Well, Brock Solutions, as I think everybody knows, software controls and IT and baggage handling systems, everything turnkey. We do our own panels in our panel shop, all the commissioning, testing, emulation environments, etc. And of course, we also have a manufacturing business unit. We do a lot of the same stuff in other industries. So we bring a lot of the real-time control experience across various industries into the baggage handling industry as well. So we're in, I think it's 75% of the Category X airports in the US, and we're starting to branch out into other parts of the world like Dublin and Australia. So yeah, it's exciting times. It's busy in the industry right now.
So yeah, you call them emulations. We know them as FAT tests, factory acceptance tests.
We do FATs, yes.
Yep. It's always a fun one to educate owners on when we say we got to go do a FAT somewhere.
Yeah.
They have no clue what we're saying typically.
Yeah.
So, and Brocktoberfest every other year.
Yeah. Yes, we are known
Automation Summit, I believe.
We're known for the Airport Automation Summit, also known as Brocktoberfest, yes. Every second year on the evens. So we just had it here in 2024, and we'll do it again in 2026.
That's up in Kitchener,
Ontario, Canada.
Fast fact, Kitchener used to be named New Berlin before they renamed it Kitchener, correct?
You're right, Ryan. Yes. And it actually allegedly is the second largest Oktoberfest outside of Munich, Germany.
Well, they have good schnitzel. If you can get a seat at the downstairs table, there's a very good schnitzel to be had.
Yeah.
I recommend it.
Beer garden before you got to the schnitzel.
Well, and it's a must for anybody in the industry to at least go once in a while.
I mean, the Automation Summit, the intention is to have customers coming to actually share their experiences with other customers. So it's not a Brock sales pitch. It's actually, customers sharing experiences and lessons learned, et cetera, and how different solutions have worked for different airports, different airlines, et cetera. So it's, it's always fun. We end the day with a fun night, but there is a legitimate reason for going. I think that lots of our customers and friends and partners in the industry see a lot of value in attending that.
Well, I think in the the education that you get, like you said, regarding the solutions, and that's kind of what I want to roll into first. We all have challenges on the project. I know from the construction side, the logistics are typically a challenge for us. I'm sure for Ryan, the design and
it's the IRD.
Yeah.
The demarcation line for the interface requirements document is the biggest challenge that I run into, coordinating where that line is between the BHS OEM, the controls house, as we would call it, and the GCs, the Turners of the world.
So what are the challenges that Brock sees typically on a project, baggage handling project?
Well, when you talk about specs, I think actually there was a session, unfortunately, that I missed for the IABSC Summit. I apologize for missing that. I had some family things going on. They did talk about specs, and some of the challenges that we have is how quickly things move on the technology side, and everything. All the controls companies are dealing with is new technologies, especially for IT, and it's changing every year. There's something new. You've got to keep things up to date. So it is hard to keep, specs up to date with changing technologies. I think some of the other challenges, one of the big ones for us is we do a lot of work for airports, for airlines, and depending on who wrote the spec, we might see where it actually conflicts. We'll find some conflicts with what we know the customer actually wants. So then we're a little bit in the middle trying to decide, trying to navigate that between end customer and, whether it's an airline or an airport and whoever the, project team is, the OEM or the consultant, et cetera. That can be a bit of a challenge at times, for sure.
So do you find, educating the owners ahead of time, is that a good solution to
Absolutely.
get them to
Yeah.
make their decisions?
Yeah, I mean, Aecom and yourself with Turner and lots of other companies have subject matter experts that can really help customers understand, not just what a conveyor layout looks like and how it's going to work and what it's going to do for them, but also even, knowing a bit about the controls and software side of it and helping coach them through, what could that, what am I trying to get out of the system today? And then what am I trying to get out of this in 10 years from now? And how is that system going to age? And how are we going to be able to keep it up to date? Because again, specs are, it's a challenge to keep specs up to date. It's definitely a challenge to keep the system itself up to date, right? So, now with ever-changing IT landscape, cybersecurity is,
this is what I wanted to talk about, right? Was the one person at the airport that you're always forced to coordinate with, who ultimately is not a baggage expert or has no knowledge of baggage, is the IT folks.
Yeah.
They're typically super knowledgeable in their realm,
for sure,
and maybe they're overconfident in the ease of understanding a bag system, which is where I lean on the Brocs of the world to help us temper the expectations of the IT folks and the cybersecurity. I mean, we used to have standalone baggage systems. It was its own network for a reason, right? Mission critical, all those big words. And now we're starting to write on airport networks. We're starting to deal with air-gapped firewalls. And like you said, the landscape is changing so rapidly. How are you guys? How do you guys navigate that?
Yeah, good question. You talk about standalone networks. There's hardly an airport that I can think of, even in other industries, right? I worked at a power plant many years ago, and it was, it's air-gapped. We're never going to have, just because you're air-gapped doesn't mean that it's safe, right? You could have somebody plug a thumb drive in, and all of a sudden, you're infected or something like that. We've definitely seen in the last, I think it's 5 or 6 years ago, there was a large customer in this industry that had a ransomware attack, and it was from a thumb drive, as opposed to like logging into something remotely. But I mean, to get data out of a system, which we all want the data to understand how the system's operating, and there's tons of data. Like when we could go down the path of IoT and all that stuff, and more and more sensors and data. But if you're going to create more data, you're going to want to consume more data. You're going to want that outside of the system so you can really report on it and use analytics and things like that. We've got lots of customers that are getting our data, ingesting it into things like Power BI or Tableau or what have you. But you got to be connected to be able to do that. So now you've got this marrying of the, we call it the IT and the OT. So like the operations technologies, there's a bit gray because you still have Windows servers and all that stuff. You got Windows workstations, which are traditionally more IT, but you've got OT technologies running on it. So you've got an HMI that's running, Siemens WinCC or FactoryTalk or Wonderware or Ignition. So that software package, the IT folks are not typically familiar with that. So when you start talking about trying to keep that up to date and patch it, it's a little more complicated than just pushing out a patch for Microsoft Outlook. It doesn't really work like that. Without getting too much into specifics, like you've got different ports that things are communicating on that IT folks are just not used to seeing. And we've even had incidents where you plug in an IT scanning tool that's automatically going through and categorizing, it's cataloging everything that's on your network, and it sees, an HMI server, doesn't know what it is, shuts it down, right? Well, that's not a good thing in a baggage handling system. So I don't know if I answered your question, Ryan, but
I'd like to go back to the data for a minute, because data, it seems, coming from the O&M background and wanting to use that data to help better maintain the system, a lot of times we run into airlines, especially in a common use system, and especially in international, who the data actually belongs to, right? And the data sharing between airlines and airport and who owns what. That's always a question, and I know that some of that stuff gets firewalled, and it's without the right password or whatever to access it, you're not going to be able to. So when you're starting a project like that, how's that determined? Is that a direction from the airport, or is that how do you guys do that?
This might be controversial, but I would say it's not necessarily determined at the start of a project, and quite often those type of questions come up after we've gone live, and that's not the best time to be having that discussion. So it's actually something that probably should be talked about up front during design phase. Who maintains the data, who owns the data, who has access to the data? Are there pipes out to other systems? If we're doing a system at a particular terminal, at a particular airport, what does the airport get? Because they have needs. What is the airline or airlines for that terminal? What do they get? How do they get it? I don't know that I have an easy answer for that, but I do think the discussion should start much sooner than it currently does.
Well, and I mean, that kind of ties into the ORAD too, right? When do you start the ORAD? I've always maintained that even though the ORAD occurs at the end, it should start in the beginning. I mean, just for things like that, for data, but also for how that data is going to be presented at the end. Talk about things like as-built drawings, right? If you go into a lot of the airports, they got rooms full of 3-ring binders for as-built drawings, and nobody can access them. So, one of those upfront questions needs to be what media do you want this in? Do you want to load it into a Maximo program for your O&M? Do you want you want thumb drives? How do you want that? And I think to that end, if you're talking about the end users and ORAD, that's probably where that discussion should start.
Well, actually, I would say, where the discussion could start, I think it should start at specification time. The next checkpoint for us typically, right, is at you mentioned the factory acceptance test. That's the perfect time. Ideally, you have all the key stakeholders in the same room. You've got essentially a running system. The software, the controls think that the HMI, the reports, everything thinks that the baggage handling system is there and it's running, and you're pulling up reports, and you can pull up Power BI dashboards, and you can really actually look at what this stuff looks like before anything's ever installed on site. That to me should be like the last checkpoint. Then you're getting into the ORAT discussion, and you've already figured it all out.
I mean, one of the reasons in the spec development, I've always said data collection just for the sake of data collection doesn't do anybody any benefit, but I still require it in many instances. And when the client comes to me and says, what am I going to do with this data? I say, we don't have a use for it today, but tomorrow we might, so let's just collect it now.
I don't disagree with that, and we hear that a lot in the industry. The only thing I would say is, speaking, I think for all the controls companies in the industry, when you start adding more data points, it's actually more things that we have to test and validate, right? Which means it's more time.
So your commissioning schedule needs to be longer?
It could be, yeah. I mean, if you think about adding, say, a vibration sensor on every single belt on a 1500 drive system.
It's 1500 more I/O points.
Well, and we have to validate that in the office while we're doing all of our internal testing. Then we validate it during the FAT, and then we go to site and we actually validate it on the system. It's not just one time you test that stuff. You're going to test it multiple times over, and then, it's 1,500 times. So I agree. I hear a lot of IT departments that want to get as much data as they can because they don't know down the line what they may or may not need. But there's a cost to that.
And that's the thing we don't know. Like, half the reason we limit the specs is there's no insight into how much is it going to cost if I ask for this and what does it do to our budget. So it gets cut, which is why it never gets added into most of these types of systems, because gosh forbid my ROM estimate budget is blown because I asked for shaft run out sensors, right, or some other field monitoring.
Yeah, and it's always cheaper and easier to do it while you're building the system than 5 years from now, and it's like, well, we want to go add this. It's nowhere near as easy to do it at that point. So I do agree with that.
I guess just bringing all that in, if you had your druthers, if you had your way that you were going to run a project, what would you want to see? What would you want owners to have ready for decisions? What would you want to have in the spec? Perfect.
Another good question. We do like being involved in projects as early as possible. And when I say, traditionally in baggage handling systems for controls many years ago, when I first started 23 years ago, we wouldn't get involved in a project until there's 100% design. It's gone out to all the OEMs. The OEMs have kind of done their thing, or even a GC, right? A GC, then an OEM, then it gets to us. And typically, by that time, there's not really much we can do to influence, the layout for sure, different aspects. There might be little things that we could change, but there's been many times over the years where we went in to do a system, even a greenfield system, and we found lots of things that didn't work quite the way we would like it to, and we'd have to change it later. So I think probably the top of the list would really be getting involved in projects upfront, early, not just from a layout perspective, but also from I mentioned the IT perspective, right? Even controls architecture nowadays, there's lots of new technologies, all the different drive manufacturers, the big industry leaders, Rockwell, Siemens, etc., all have new technologies coming out. And typically the controls company is the most familiar with that. We can provide kind of real-time feedback around designs, because you might be designing a system that's going to go into operation 5 years from now. So you want to have the latest and greatest information, and that way when you actually turn the system on, you've got the newest possible system that you can have. The last thing you want is to put something in that's actually 5 years old or older.
You think the specifications are not prescriptive enough or performance enough, and are over specifying, like, we want this type of computer at these monitors, and then by the time you go to install it, you say this isn't powerful enough for what we needed to do, as a simple example? Or are you talking design assist?
I'd say more design assist, yeah. That's worked very well for us.
It's so hard on a traditional delivery method to get a design assist because it oftentimes precludes you from bidding. So from my standpoint, it's really hard for me to engage unless it's an alternative delivery format to even get you a seat at the table if I wanted.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's part of the education too. And then the one part that I thought you were going to say you want to be engaged in was schedule, because what I've seen with the controls is, the mechanical, they go long, and then the electricians come in behind them and they say, "Oh, my beard, you don't know what long is," and they go really long, and then and if the whole thing doesn't shift, then we're coming to Brock and we're saying, "Okay, you got a day."
You do it in 2 weeks instead of a month.
You got a day.
We actually have a very specific example of that right now. I won't mention where, but that's always been the case, though, to be honest. Like for 23 years, it's very common when we're doing projects. So, Obviously we want as much time as we can to fully test out the system.
Yep.
Like, doesn't matter if it's Brock or somebody else, you're going to be doing device level checks, you're going to be doing then rolling into system level checks. You need to check all of your your HMI, your reports, if you've got analytics.
So I'll tell you what the problem with that is. Okay, the problem is that people cannot touch and feel it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they can see when the mechanical's going in, they can see the pipe being roughed in and wires being pulled.
Yeah.
They can't see what you're doing, so they just assume that it's not a lot that they're doing. They're just plugging their computers in, and that, to your point, that's not the case. And that's we've changed our approach in baggage jobs now to where we are pull planning out the entire baggage schedule, and then we're putting it in the construction schedule. So if anything moves, if the baggage mechanical moves, baggage electrical moves, or even if structural moves, it's going to cause a change.
Mm-hmm.
Your time frame doesn't move at the end, because we've seen that as to your point, there are plenty of examples of it. Last 23 years, we can't allow that to happen. And as a construction manager, we're managing the project. We have to make sure it doesn't happen for you. We got to be that champion.
But that's waterfall scheduling, right? Which, I mean, I don't want to say it's the easiest way to execute a project, because if one thing changes, every downstream activity just day for day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, not exactly. I mean, for
I like to
us,
subsystem it. Subsystem by subsystem is kind of how I like to look at the controls work, so that if I can at least give them an opportunity to work on this subsystem because these subsystems are falling down. Something to keep the team mobilized, because nothing's worse on a baggage project.
But sometimes that doesn't. So that, to your point, having the controls company, software company, weigh in on the schedule, because sometimes subsystem by subsystem, like we've seen, can you just commission this one line, right? Doesn't work like that. Can you commission this part? Like, there's a lot of factors that go into, is the network for that entire, we'll say break it up by PLC. Are all the networks installed? Are all the e-stops installed? Is everything there that we can actually run it as though it's done?
Because multiple subsystems are sharing hardware.
Could be interfaces are missing, so then you kind of jump through hoops. And I think as execution teams on a project, we always find ways to work through those challenges. You're right though. Like from a GC perspective, you guys always try to find a way to keep that amount of time. I'm just saying that since controls companies are typically the last one out of the gate, right? If there's going to be a push and try to squeeze that, it's going to be on us for sure.
Well, and that's why it's not a one-time engagement, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to be involved in the pull planning. We'll break it down. We can even break it down by subsystem. But, to your point, when things do shift, it's a reevaluation, right? And that happens throughout the project constantly. So you've got to reevaluate every time you see a shift in that schedule and figure out, not just how you're going to get over that one part, but how everything is going to flow as a result of that. And that will give you your true shift, how far out to the right you're going to go, or if you can pull it in to the left. So it's more than one engagement.
All right, let me throw a curveball at you.
Not from you, Ryan, really?
Yeah, I guarantee I got to give you one. It'll be an easy one. We'll start with softball,
Okay.
soft curveball.
All right.
Is it easier for you to have the electrical installation team as a sub to you so that you can control the installations that he's doing? Or is it, irrelevant, or are you agnostic as to that?
Agnostic is probably a good way to put it. I mean, when we're working with all the OEMs, they have great electrical install teams all throughout the country. Professionals that know what they're doing. Typically, our team we'll have somebody that's kind of embedded in their electrical install team that's helping kind of, if they have questions, etc. We will subcontract the electrical, but we don't have to. It's not a prerequisite. You do get into potential markup on, like if we're marking up an electrical installer and passing that on, that's not the most efficient either.
It depends on what state too, because in some states like California, they are not considered a subcontractor or any kind of contractor, so they're not able to bring anybody on, as a contractor.
True,
So
technically.
you have to be
yeah.
certified with the state for that.
Yeah.
No, and
So-
I'm agnostic, but I
Yeah.
really like having Brock's PM make sure that all of the wires are properly labeled, and
Yeah.
they're the ones who create those detailed electrical drawings. They
Yeah.
know what those electrical drawings are for, so that I don't know, like that markup thing that we talk about. Maybe it's cheap insurance in my mind, right? I execute them both ways, but
Yeah.
I mean, belt and suspenders.
We still do everything that we would normally do on a project, irrespective of whether the electrical installer is under us or not, right? So the level of quality and the care and all that stuff is still there. It really shouldn't matter if they're under us or not. It's typically not our approach
Okay.
to subcontract, but we have on occasion. There's a lot of interfaces that go on between the mechanical installer from for the OEM from a mechanical and an electrical perspective. Our approach has always been that there's so much interconnection between how that goes in, installation and interferences, etc.
J-box accessibility,
All of it, yeah.
phenolic tag location.
So yeah, you would think that the controls should dictate that, but not necessarily. We think that it's important that the OEM has influence over the electrical installer because it's their conveyor that's going in.
Okay.
Yeah. Typically when I purchase baggage handling OEMs, I always have a liaison if they're going to have Brock on board either under them or Brock's direct to us. I always make sure that they have a controls liaison. So, again, communication being the biggest thing on projects, and so I still have them bring in their own controls person to make sure that they've got Brock lined out in the field and that communication's happening, because a lot of times these guys will come up and tell the site manager something, and he's it's all Greek to the site manager. So having a controls guy there as well is just another, I think, piece of insurance to make sure that you guys get your say in how things are going to flow.
What'd you call us last night?
What did-
Keyboard jockeys? Is that what you called?
That wasn't me.
That wasn't you?
No.
Oh,
me either.
that wasn't you either.
No, sir.
was
Centralized or distributed?
That's a question.
Yeah. There's the curveball.
That's
I mean,
that's a good question.
Yeah, so there's trade-offs to both. I'm not going to say that there's a perfect answer to that because there's different use cases. That's like saying ICS versus standard conveyor. There's different use cases on every install. We still do centralized installs if that's what makes sense for the customer.
I prefer it for inbound systems with compact logics,
I mean-
PLCs, right?
The biggest one, I think many years ago, I remember lots of discussions with like Gaylord and some others around that in the industry. Centralized was supposed to save money on electrical install, distributed was supposed to save money on electrical
Less
install.
wiring.
The idea being, we're just plug and play and, less electrical install. We've seen some instances where you could call it the right or the wrong distributed architecture actually makes the price more. So it really does depend, I think, on, you've seen one airport, like there could be, it could have a ton of different factors, even the market that you're in and the labor market, right?
Oh, specific regions.
Doing an install in Omaha versus doing an install in New York or San Francisco or LA, there's a big difference there, right?
Sure.
So,
Well, you want to give a shout out to anybody on
give
the
a
podcast?
shout out.
Yeah.
Should I give a shout out to Eric Bird for
Yeah, I think so.
making me stand in for him? No, I want to give a shout out to you guys. I appreciate it.
No, we're glad
I
to
think
have you.
It's a fun concept. It's not a small amount of work to put these together. So, I appreciate you guys doing it. And is this the first?
This is the first.
This is the first.
Yeah.
Well, I'm honored to be here for the
Yeah,
first.
Thank
Happy
you.
to have you.
Thank you. be on the
But
inaugural.
I look forward to it. This set, his studio is amazing.
Yeah.
And I think it'll only
Only
get
the
better.
best for Brock, always.
Well, thanks.
Again, man, thanks for your time. Appreciate
Thanks,
you
Mike.
coming.
Dan, appreciate it.
Ryan,
Yeah,
thank you very
anytime, mate.
much.
Yep.
That's it for
Appreciate it.
this episode. Please come back and see us again in the bag room.